What, are we filming? Oh, we are. Well, that's too bad because I'm having fun over here.
I see the bad moon rising. I see trouble on the way. I see earthquakes on the boats and on the planes. They're coming to America.
Crazy kaiju kids, where have you been all my life? We don't see each other enough. And that's my fault. I apologize. But welcome to my first attempt of this little sub-series. We're going to be focusing on some American kaiju films as I move into season 3. And it occurs to me it's kind of embarrassing. I've been doing this for like 2.5 years now and have never reviewed even one movie with King Kong in it. Not even a Kong film, but even a film with King Kong in it. So I think to kick off my patriotic monster series, let's start with the freshest of the batch so far, Kong Skull Island. Hold up. Yeah, okay. Okay, now I look like a crazy person. Now I can do a movie review. So the first thing I have to hit off is how impressed I was with the ambition of this movie. This is a distinctly different take on King Kong. It's not just that he's bigger. There is an attempt to establish Kong as an American icon, an American monster, in a way that he never really has been established. The very first King Kong film, it's a fantastic, amazing work of cinematic art, but it's largely a spectacle film. I mean, it's like the first Star Wars ever. It's the first time that people just couldn't believe what they were seeing in a movie theater. And it's always kind of had this gravitas and this magic and this legacy that directors get crushed under, but there's not a whole lot of social or political commentary to play with there. And the commentary there was there is fairly racist, I suppose. And Kong Skull Island didn't completely ignore that legacy, but they tried to attach Kong to the American story, to our story as a culture in a much more significant way than Kong ever has been. And I think that was the smartest move about this project.
Is that a monkey?
Now I'll get into it as the review goes, but just to hit it at the top, what I felt like this movie was attempting to do, and for the most part actually accomplished pretty decently, was to attach King Kong to a social wound within the American psyche, a military failure, very much in the same way Mr. Goji over here is attached to the horrors of World War II and the nuclear bombs of Japan. And the event that King Kong is very deliberately attached to in this film is the Vietnam conflict. Could be a really clunky, awkward experiment, and actually it's mostly brilliance. The concept is pretty fucking genius in my opinion. Now, we are hampered by a really miserable script. I would love to think maybe there's a director's cut out there lurking somewhere. We'll probably never see it. The script is clunky as hell. There were 3 people working on it. That's usually not a good sign. One of them is a holdover from Garrett Edwards' Godzilla. Max Borenstein, I believe. But the pacing is exhausting. This movie certainly needed just even 15 more minutes, would have given you a lot more payoff for its characters and some of the arcs, the narratives that were written in here. But the editing is, some of it is straight up amateur hour. I mean, there's some action sequences where like people are in different spots in the room, people's perspective of where they're looking shifts around. I've heard a lot of people hit up like the first 20-ish minutes of this film where we're assembling our exploratory team, it's freaking gobbledygook at times, and it rarely pays off. And it's unfortunate because there are quick little moments throughout the script where you realize there was a good setup, there was good background they could have capitalized on, and they missed it. They missed it in a rush to try and get, I think, the first King Kong film that comfortably hits a 2-hour mark. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that. I really do. But we left a lot of casualties along the way, and not just all the people getting crushed by King Kong or giant spiders or pterodactyls. Now, conceptually, I've been kind of battling between, is King Kong a symbol, an icon for nature, or is he actually literally a icon for the Vietnam War? After thinking about it, I'm definitely going to argue that King Kong is the symbol for Vietnam. King Kong embodies Vietnam. The island tends to become more nature. And when I was playing around with this, when I thought about, like, if the island is Vietnam, it's a pretty regressive, and then it even starts to become kind of back, like, old-timey racist. The way, you know, the monsters lurk in the bushes and leap out at you, gets right back to kind of that dehumanizing depiction of the Viet Cong. And I have a hard time believing that our director, our team, could pitch something like that to a studio. And with the budget and the advertising that Kong Skull Island had, they'd be like, yeah, by all means, let's get right back into that ugly mess, especially with our current political climate. No. Now, I said I was wrestling with Kong as a symbol of nature or a symbol of the Vietnam War. I think he can be both. I think he serves as both. And that's maybe where our metaphor that the team was playing with does tend to get sloppy. I'm not sure they technically land everything they wanted in this allegory, but they came close and they tried. I think the best way to start this explanation, though, is just to talk about the first 2-3 minutes. I think I hit this up with my Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster review. I really love when a director can, in the first couple minutes of a movie, set up imagery that immediately, in the first few shots, communicates everything the director wants to discuss with you for the next hour or so. It's like the introduction to a good essay, right? Here's all the points I want you to start thinking about, and now we'll expand as the plot goes. So think about the very opening of Kong Skull Island, which, hey, spoilers, heads up, if you're watching this, why are you watching this? This will be nothing but spoilers. So the opening scene, we have the U.S. Fighter pilot, the Japanese fighter pilot. We are in World War II. They start off in the planes. They crash land on Skull Island. They continue their conflict. But we have to even think about, how does their conflict evolve? They start off in the fighter jets, some of the most sophisticated modern technology of its time. The jets fail. They crash. They're on the island. They are now, our American soldier, our Japanese soldier, serve as avatars for the two nations at combat now. They start off with more modern technology. They go to guns. But guns aren't as new as jets, right? So the combat's already regressing. The guns fail. Now we are back to almost nature. We are back to a samurai blade, and we are back to fisticuffs, right? So as these two warring individuals continue their battle, they are regressing back to a more natural state of combat and war like we see in nature. And then finally, King Kong shows up. This movie is not shy about showing off King Kong. Legendary clearly was taking notes after the Garrett Edwards production. But Kong interrupts that war. Kong, as a force of nature, all the war stops when he arrives. And we later find out that not only did Kong let both of them live, which does become a litmus test as this movie goes on. We see that Kong murders some people very casually, and he develops a bond and a respect for those who respect nature. He gives judgment like a god. But the fact that he lets both of them live tells us that on some level, Kong saw them as part of the island, a part of nature now. And that's exactly who our director, let's hold up. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Let's see if I can get it right. His name is Jordan Vogt-Roberts. I'm not going to get it right, so we're calling him Director Roberts from here on out. uh, he gets right back to, you know, where I feel the heartbeat of good kaiju tradition lies with director Oshiro Honda, who is constantly having that discussion about the balance of humans and nature. But Honda also, I think, is pretty specific in his theory that nature is inherently violent. Violence is not necessarily the problem. The problem is modern warfare that is so disconnected from nature, where we get the atomic bombs that leave generations of deformed human beings being born, that poison soil for decades. We get into machine guns that can automatically refill and just massacre fields of people in a minute. It's Yes, it's still violence. It's inherently disconnected from nature, um, and I think director Roberts understood that, and right away in the first couple minutes sets up the discussion he's going to have about that. So from there, let's quickly segue into the discussion about the Vietnam conflict. It is no secret, both in the marketing and in the actual production, that they are borrowing heavily from Apocalypse Now. There's some references to other old timey Vietnam films. There's also a soundtrack that's almost a little too on the nose, a little indicative. I wish they'd been maybe just a hint more creative about it. But like I said, it's a really fascinating thing to do with King Kong, to try to attach him. And the reason I lean on to King Kong as the metaphor that he is the Vietnam conflict is kind of the buildup of the story, but also the way Kong is handled with certain characters, in particular Samuel L. Jackson's character, who I think General Packard, who is frustrated and devastated by the end of the Vietnam conflict, which is right where this movie starts, and he kind of supplements. Once he sees King Kong, he substitutes Kong as the war he couldn't finish, and in that way we get this kind of Captain Ahab madman tracking like hunting session that is perfectly reasonable in a Kong film, not dissimilar from what we've seen with other efforts, but a unique twist that it's not a businessman necessarily, or some entrepreneur or filmmaker with like Peter Jackson's film. Now we have a military man who feels very strongly about like mission complete, and I've got to stop that mission, and the mission is Kong now. But Vietnam also is a unique conflict for our the American legacy, right? It tends to be the first real epic military failure that now, whenever we talk about modern combat, it's what people always refer to. They refer to the quagmire situation, the occupation of Iraq from the Bush years. Obviously, we get a lot of comparisons there, and it's pretty timely, to be honest, that the iconography is so focused on Nixon. We see a lot of shots of Nixon. We also get the Nixon bobblehead that's bobbling out of control as they're going into the storm, right? Like you can read into it pretty easily where we're going here. What's fun about it, though, is when Kong, right after Samuel L. Jackson gives this speech about, we're not Icarus who's going to fly too close to the sun, because our wings aren't made of wax. Our wings are made of Pennsylvania steel, American steel. And not 5 minutes later, they run into Kong. And Kong and Jackson have this great, they mirror the shot a few times where they're just staring each other down. And Kong takes the military planes and helicopters and he smashes them into the ground, and there's fireballs, and it's a beautiful shot. But it's also like that shot is kind of the perfect summation of everything about the Vietnam War. It was American arrogance, it was misunderstandings, it was miscommunications, it was overzealous pride. And here was a force that we didn't understand, we didn't predict, we didn't do our research on, and it is literally destroying our military in front of us. And because of the way it kind of continues and mirrors that, that's why I feel like Kong ultimately throughout this film tends to symbolize the Vietnam War. And I think we see that metaphor through to the end, where Samuel L. Jackson finally does capture Kong, does have a chance to kill him, and the rest of the platoon turn on him. The rest of the little society we have with the reporter and the tracker and everyone else turns on him. they realize in order to win this war, we have to become something we cannot become. We have to dehumanize, debase ourselves. Killing Kong is a loss of our soul. Therefore, we cannot kill Kong. We cannot win the Vietnam War without becoming the villain that, we would sacrifice too much of our souls to accomplish. Now, Samuel L. Jackson does still go and try and detonate the bomb and kill Kong, and Kong kills him. So that's why the more I thought about it, the more I see Kong very much as the symbol for this war and the defeat of this war. So as opposed to Garrett Edwards' production that dealt a lot with military culture in a present conflict, Director Roberts gives us a lot of really interesting commentary on post-conflict. Specifically, I feel like there is a discussion about PTSD going on in this film, as it relates to three of the most important and easily the most intriguing characters. We have Samuel L. Jackson's general, Packard, John C. Reilly's soldier from World War II, which I love. I freaking love that this is a kaiju film with someone literally from World War II in it. His name was something Marlowe. I don't know, Soldier Marlowe something. And then we have John Goodman's character, and we find out each of these men are kind of driven by past traumas, right? Let's start with John C. Reilly, because I think his is the most obvious discussion of PTSD.
Steve, come on.
Steve, just improvise.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. We're not ready, Jan, Wayne. We don't have the fruit.
So he's a soldier. He's trapped on an island. It is still a hostile island. He does have a community of tribespeople who are kind to him, who are helpful to him, but don't speak his language. He can only relate to them so much. Think about how similar that is for certain soldiers in certain conditions of PTSD. They come home from the war and they have these flashbacks. They think people in the mall are still trying to attack them or snipe them. They have family and even communities to help them deal with it, but they can't fully relate and understand what it was like to be in the war and what it was like to sacrifice in the war. A lot of, the PTSD symptoms, it becomes similar to you're trapped on an island in your mind, and that island is trapped in the past. You can't progress and get reacquainted with current society. And so John C. Reilly's character, even though he's literally trapped on an island, we also see he's suffered some trauma too. They kind of make fun of it, but he's having a discussion with one of the characters, and he says, I don't know if my mouth's moving, if I'm talking anymore, because he's been talking to himself for so long. But then that brings us over to General Packard, Samuel L. Jackson's character, who is so crushed by the loss of the Vietnam War, but also is given the option at the top of the movie, you want to go home, see your family for a bit before you go on this mission? Nope, I want to go on this mission, and it will be a privilege. He doesn't want to disconnect from the military lifestyle. He needs it. He breathes it. He doesn't want to lose it. And that drives him, and you see as the movie goes, he does a brilliant job as an actor. The script tries to get him there, and the pace, honestly, the editing and the pacing won't allow him time to set this up appropriately. But they get there. They do. That he's just slowly going mad, and he in his drive and his pursuit of Kong. But then we have our third individual who's part of this PTSD discussion in John Goodman, who sets up the entire expedition. Everything about the film revolves around what this character wanted. Now, I think this was a huge missed opportunity with the script. They should have up front told us that he was a surviving member from a ship that was attacked by another kaiju. I've seen some online discussion. I think it's pretty heavily suggested that his ship was attacked by Godzilla in the 40s, 50s. But now what we get it halfway through the freaking movie why he's doing all this. He says he was one person of a crew of 1,000 to survive. He knows the monsters are out there. He's seen them, and he needs to prove it. He needs the validation to help everyone else understand the trauma he's been through. this also, though, he sets up this really nice reoccurring imagery about hand cuts, right? John Goodman sees that Kong, after his initial encounter with the choppers, has left a bloody handprint on the side of the mountain. And Jackson's character is excited, like, see, we can make the monster bleed, we can kill the monster. And John Goodman holds his hand up and mirrors it with Kong. And we see later in the film, I forget if it was John Goodman's character or if it was Samuel Jackson's character, they have cuts in their hand. We also see King Kong is washing his wounds in the river. He has cuts on his hand. The film starts with John C. Reilly fighting with his Japanese counterpart, grabs the samurai sword to try and stop it, and the sword starts slicing through his hands. Right? Like that's a very specific repeated image that almost all of these characters share. But it's also interesting that they all kind of have different agendas. You know, Samuel L. Jackson isn't necessarily impressed with John Goodman's reasoning. John C. Reilly's been totally in his own world. Kong is obviously on a whole different side of this conflict, but they all have the same wound. They all have the same wound, and they're all bleeding from that same wound. And to me, it kind of it's reminiscent of like that blood brother pack sort of thing people used to do, where it's like, you know, put a little cut in your hand, shake hands, let the blood mix. I don't know if that's what director Roberts was going for, that specific. Could be. But what I like about that idea is it also gets us back to this idea that despite that we might all be playing a different game of chess currently, we're all still interconnected, we're all still related, the blood is still the same. Which again, right back to classic Ishiro Honda discussion of the brotherhood of man trumping all the other agendas of any countries or any politics. So I think the last kind of, symbolic imagery-based discussion we have to have is, I guess I would describe it as the weaponization of nature. It's, you know, like I said, Kong's an easy avatar for nature, but there's a lot of shots too that are very interesting and specific. When the military first starts bombing the island for, you know, seismic activity test levels, I don't know, stupid exposition, don't worry about it, the script's not. Before we even see Kong, the first thing that takes out one of the helicopters is a giant tree flying through the air. Very specific, right? Like, it wasn't necessarily a monster yet, we don't know the monster's even here yet, but it's like they attack nature and nature is projectiling itself right back at them very specifically. Likewise, our giant spider attack, which is all too brief but is still really fun, and I see a few fans online have quickly taken to referring to this spider as Kamanga, which I would love if that reference was that specific. I don't know if that's what they were going for. They probably need copyright or something. But before you realize it's a giant spider, its legs look like bamboo sticks. So it's literally, it's not an enemy lurking in the bamboo ready to jump out at you, a la old school Viet Cong propaganda. It's literally the bamboo stabbing people. The first shot you see is a man impaled by a giant bamboo stick, and you don't, it's a gruesome, fascinating shot, but you have a few seconds of going, what the fuck was that? Did the stick come up from the ground? Did it come down below? You don't know, because you just suddenly see he's dropped his water bottle and he's impaled by bamboo. And then you realize the bamboo is the spider. So this idea of the nature, though, reconnects back into the way certain characters want to, you know, shoot the water buffalo, and other characters say, you know, respect the water buffalo. And that's the whole basis of our photographer, Brie Larson, and her relationship with Kong, as Kong sees her attempting to help one of the water buffalo, who is, again, the imagery isn't subtle here. The water buffalo is trapped under a piece of man-made technology, one of the broken helicopters, and is dying. She's trying to just get enough leverage to help the water buffalo up, and then Kong lifts it, helps out the water buffalo, helps Brie Larson, and that's where his entire relationship with humans you start to understand he's fine with humans as long as they respect the island and respect nature, right? There is a discussion about the past versus the present here, which might seem a little contradictory with a film set in the 70s. And some of this is just dumb luck on the director's part that he, clearly all the planning for this had to have been done 2 years ago. But to have a film that deals so heavily with Nixon iconography while we are currently dealing with a president who, even if you somehow have convinced yourself you like Trump, there's no denying him and Nixon have a lot of similar qualities about the way they handle, uh, specifically their relationship with the press. And so to have, John Goodman, his first line is something about, "You'll never see a more messed up time in Washington." It's like, oh, come on, dude, too on the nose, too topical, you're trying too hard. But then remember, this movie had to have been plotted a long time ago. So that it's, I don't know if you ever call anything about the Trump presidency dumb luck, but it's there. The more interesting stuff, though, is definitely John C. Reilly's connection to World War II. Is a stroke of freaking genius. And actually, I don't mind making the argument that this film deals with World War II in a more interesting and visceral way than I think Garrett Edwards even did with Godzilla. Now, mind you, it's mostly an American soldier, but we later find out he had, developed a close bond with his Japanese counterpart, also trapped on the island, Colonel Hikari or something. And then he carries the samurai sword throughout the film, which has a few moments, but you see symbolically, it's his way of bringing his friend home. He promised his friend, "I wouldn't leave the island without you," and then his friend got killed by one of the skull crawlers, which is a really sad scene we never even get to see. What I was most interested with that discussion, though, was actually in the end conflict with Kong and the big queen skullcrawler. He initially gets knocked down and he's in the riverbank and he gets caught up in all these chains, right? I know, really subtle, right? Chains. Well, those never mean anything. Um, but it's an old wartime ship, right? It's not modern technology. It has to be World War II, if not even older. So for a moment, he's losing the battle because he is literally caught up in the chains of past technology. But then, how does he win the battle? He gets the chains off, and then he pulls off a propeller from the old boat, and now he's using the deconstructed ship from the past as a weapon, as opposed to something that is keeping him caged and bound under. So, I mean, I give very specifically a message about you have to learn from the lessons of past. Don't let it crush you. Don't let it chain you down. Use it as a weapon to take out the new enemy. So I guess we should maybe some discussion about the actual production. Visually, it's great. King Kong is handled incredibly well. And I really appreciate that they didn't force the romantic narrative of the girl and the monster thing as much. It's still there. Don't get me wrong. It's still there, but it's way more subtle. And it's also, it's a little more earned. It's not like Kong just sees Brie Larson and immediately is infatuated with her. He sees her trying to do good and develops a respect with her. He walks away from her at first. He walks up to her and walks away from her a few times. He doesn't need to capture her or anything. She's not a play toy to him. She is a respected inhabitant of his island. He has judged her and judged her well. I appreciate that. And the film did a lot of nice jobs of just giving you a few slow moments of Kong, letting you see him exploring the island. The Octopus Fight is a great little meta reference for fans of, past Kong entries. But it's brief enough. It's not a huge deal. And then you see him eat up the octopus. I really do appreciate the way Kong is handled. He's humanized, but the movie isn't just smacking you across the face like, feel bad for him, feel bad for him. He's also a warrior. He's also a wrathful god at times. There's a lot of detail and texture to this Kong, not just his character and narrative, but also just the way he looks is wonderful. I really do appreciate having him stand up and walk on two legs. It gets back to my theory about kaiju, that when they kind of look like humans, when they kind of feel almost humanoid, we make that connection again of the monsters and humanity aren't that different. It's why I feel so strongly about people in suits. I think it sends a very different discussion to your brain, that even if you're not realizing it, your mind is totally breaking it down in a different way than when it is literally an animal or literally just CGI gobbledygook a la Michael Bay. So this is a top-notch cast, and unfortunately they're largely wasted. And this goes into the real problem with this movie. There's so much good conceptual ideas on the table. The imagery is awfully specific for an action film. You can tell the directors, the screenwrites definitely set up some really cool images to have the larger discussion. It's not as throwaway action summer blockbuster as some people interpreted it and as the advertisements made it seem. Its major hindrance is the script. Anytime you have a movie where someone wanders into a room and goes, "What are you doing here?" Well, I could ask you the same thing. I mean, I felt like I could hear 5 people slapping their forehead in the audience when I was there. And God, poor Tom Hiddleston has some line about, "Isn't it interesting that the most dangerous places are always the most beautiful?" And I'm like, you kidding me? You kidding me? 3 writers and you still kept that line in? And a lot of just macho military jargon that I get the sense no one really has a damn clue about. Thankfully, it is a talented cast. They pull it off as best they can. Honestly, I'm very impressed with what most people were actually able to breathe into their roles. But man, is it clunky. It is straight up stupid at times, and it's frustrating because it's not a stupid movie. The obvious winner here, though, is John C. Reilly, who elevates this film tremendously. And that's saying something when you're up against a cast as talented as this. I mean, Samuel L. Jackson, John Goodman, Brie Larson, Tom Hiddleston, these are all people who we know can pull off some tremendous work. And John C. Reilly, who I'm beginning to suspect might be one of the most talented actors of the current generation, just runs away with it. The film is immediately more interesting once we have him. His character helps connect this universe now into a more rich mythology in its connection to World War II. You can tell they definitely let him cut loose and improv a few scenes that are hilarious, that are interesting. But I mean, especially he's the one character who ends up having the best arc because he is the soldier, unlike most of our other soldiers who don't get to see their families or who decide they don't want to go home. He wants to go home, and we finally, at the very end credit sequence, get to see him reacquainted with his son and wife. And I mean, don't get me. I choke up at a good Pepsi ad, like not that Pepsi ad, other Pepsi ads. But man, that scene broke me. Like I was like, oh, that's so sad. That's so sweet. That's so cute. I really liked it, and it was nice to have at least one character felt like they fully had a story that actually, concluded. He was the first character you see on screen. He should be the last, right? So as usual, I've rambled too long, but I do want to hit off just a little bit of a discussion about how this film connects into the broader universe that we're setting up now. And I thought it did a really nice job. John Goodman's our obvious connection with the Monarch organization, which now we're starting to get a little bit of backstory of where Monarch was and where it started, which I think is helpful, will help inform things as we go forward. But the biggest one, obviously, is the very end, the credit sequence, or the post-credit sequence, which the credits actually kind of spoil for you. If you're watching the credits closely, you'll see copyright for King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan all crawl across the screen. And it's like, oh, well, great. Now you know. And then at the end, you get to see cave paintings. Brie Larson, Tom Hiddleston's character, are brought in for questioning. It was kind of a sloppy scene, but at least they got to the point of like, look, King Kong is not the only other king. There's other kings out there, King Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, and you get little cave paintings of them and a cave painting of Godzilla. which sets up Godzilla King of the Monsters very nicely. Um, but I thought some of the parallels between Godzilla and King Kong were really nice. They both have enemies in these movies that we know helped wipe out their species. The skull crawlers, I thought were really fun, really nasty, and just kind of fun, like sort of streamlined but interesting kaiju at the same time. But giving both of these monsters kind of a sympathetic backstory, I think, is really going to help once we get to the point where we have the collision between the two of them. Well, hey, thanks for sticking around. Hope you enjoyed all the lovely, rambly discussion. I mean, like I said, there's just so much interesting things going on in this film. I'd probably go a lot longer. I already went too long, I'm sure. Anyway, hey, thanks for checking out the channel. I hope you liked the last experiment with my assistant, Shy-Town? Yeah, we'll bring her back at some point. I'd like to get some other assistants in here. It's fun when you actually get to like discuss and ping pong ideas off each other. But in the meantime, I need to get some more reviews up because I miss talking about the monsters. I miss talking about the monsters. So hey, thanks for checking out my first American kaiju review. And like I said, I want to make a point of it. This going into season 3 here, I've been dying to try and hit up Cloverfield, Pacific Rim. There's a couple really like interesting, more modern pitches we've had. I mean, even Peter Jackson's King Kong, I'd love to talk about someday. So let's get that going. Let's get that on the docket. Until then, I'm the Kaijuologist. I'm signing off from Denver, Colorado. We're the Mile High City. We're getting higher all the time.
I'm not ready.